Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Iron Canon Podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld Podcast Network for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Matthew, and I'm coming from the new Underworld North studio here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And as always, I'm joined across the continent by your friend of mine down in Underworld Orange County, Mr. Joel Davis. How are you doing this week, Joel?
I'm doing good, and if you wonder why I look like a radio sports announcer, it's because my wireless headphones have died on me, and we're gonna hope to get them fixed Wednesday. So I'm using these ones that I use for my PlayStation.
There we go. You're about to call a pod race. Well, Annie's about to take the title. There we go. Looking forward to that. This week we are back to our Paper Canon Spotlight series, highlighting our favorite authors of the galaxy far, far away. We give our picks on who you should check out. One of those authors, not exactly in our list, but one of those authors will be John Jackson Miller, because we're also going into his epic Living Force novel announcement. Gonna do a good old fashioned news story there. First, jump in the plugs here. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Ion Cannon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD on all the socials there. Of course, at the SWU and SW social media as well. Yeah, here on the Underworld YouTube channel, we got YouTube memberships, we got super chats, we got all that fun stuff. We also got the Underworld Discord server. Joel, let us know what's happening in there.
Yes, this Friday, September I think
15th.
it's 15th.
Yeah.
Yeah, September 15th, we will be hosting a movie night.
Yes.
And this time, we are actually going to be watching a film that inspired Star Wars. That's right, we are going to be watching the Japanese 1958 classic Forbidden Fortress.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely a good idea to look back on things that influenced George Lucas, influencing Dave Filoni for sure, influencing Charles Soule and Claudia Gray and Calvin Scott and them as well. Names I will repeat later on the show. But yeah, definitely join us. Check that out. Check the link below, or if not, DM us on those socials, and we will get you that Discord link. Also, speaking of here on the Underworld YouTube channel, the Tractor Beam is back. That's right. Chris Abbott and I star after have gotten a bit of a head of steam going every 12:15 on Thursdays at 12:15 p.m. Eastern time. Grab your lunch, grab your love of comics, and don't spill your lunch on your comics unless it's the Joel. But yeah, Chris and I chatting away about the latest comics that came out this past week. Can't quite remember what we did, but it's coming up. We're doing Vader number 38, and we're gonna try the Obi-Wan Kenobi adaptation by Jody Houser. We'll see. I didn't read the Mandalorian adaptation, but gonna try the Kenobi adaptation. That should be much better. Should be more interesting. Some interesting variants going on there. So yeah, check that out. 12:15 Eastern, 9:15 Pacific. Grab your breakfast if that's more your speed right here on this here channel. So don't go anywhere. Yeah, I will work on getting all those things up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Different things behind the scenes that I need to sort out. But yeah, that will all happen. So yeah, that's been fun. Chris and I have getting a good head of steam, good banter, good back and forth there, and so it's good to have him on the Underworld channel and the Underworld Network as a regular contributor too. So looking forward to our last little point there, assembling the Tractor Beam in New York City in the Big Apple, New York Comic Con, coming up just under a month, just about a month rather. And so both Chris and I will be there. Yeah, so if you're there, say hi. If you're not, say hi. Looking forward to it. Alrighty, moving along. This week in Star Wars, what we thought about, what we engaged with in Star Wars this week, but also this week in the real world as well. Some things we want to mention.
Yeah, I
First
guess
of all, Joel, any news on the strike? Anything happening there?
no, pretty steady as it goes. I'll start with the real world stuff just to
Yeah.
kind of get us out of the way there. It's 9/11. Remember the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Also, I guess another 9/11 that not a lot of people talking about, but it does affect Star Wars because it involved Pedro Pascal.
It's true.
9/11 for Pedro Pascal is when he had to flee Chile in 1973 with his family because his family was connected to the government of Salvador Allende that got overthrown by the military.
Mhm.
And if he had stayed, that would not have been very good. So Pedro Pascal is connected to that as well. There, Chile's 9/11 in 1973, and of course today, not 2001 9/11, the terrorist attacks in New York City. So,
That's right. I was just today looking up the 9/11 memorial, place to see in New York City. It's definitely a place to see and go remember, and remember, lament what happened, lament the lives lost,
mhm.
also lament the response. There was an opportunity to build a more peaceful world, and I'm sure some folks have taken it, some didn't, and we can always work to do better. Okay, so that's good. Well, one last thing I'll say is how that's also sparked stories, narratives of great disaster. We talked about High Republic being sparked by the Hetzel disaster, and how a lot of science fiction, Battlestar Galactica, a lot of stories, written with this great past in mind. Even Star Trek Discovery. I know, trying to respect the strike, but Star Trek Discovery also written season 3 and 4 with this disaster in the past. It's really created. I mean, there's another disaster, COVID disaster here. I wonder what kind of stories will come out of that as well. Stories of isolation and disconnection, but also stories of refound connection and building for peace. So, um, life and art imitate each other in beautiful ways, in scary ways, in profound ways, and yeah, and especially the if my mic is going on, especially the lives lost. We're good. Yeah, we remember the lives lost and the families of those who have lost loved ones. Yeah, it never gets easier, or I'm sure, I don't know if it gets easier over time, but it never quite goes away, and so we continue to remember. All right, yeah, go ahead.
Awkward transition time to
All
some
good.
to some more fun things.
Yes.
To just nerdy things.
Sure.
And this is a thought I had kind of last night, and sort of going to play into our conversation later after we get the news. But I thought I'd start here and kind of have this mole in the back of our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And that's this idea I've thought about, in terms of looking at Star Wars from the more artistic lens and just like the official nerdy lens of like, and that is this idea of, does every Star Wars author, and I'm including paper and screen, just
Mm-hmm.
in the general sense of author, every Star Wars author have their own canon, and with every book, novel, TV show, and movie, we get a glimpse into their Star Wars canon. Obviously, and because I think, in a sense, I mean, my answer is yes, they do, and I think because every author sees the world of Star Wars very differently, how it worked, what the history is, the
Mm-hmm.
lore, the backstory, where characters should go, etc. Obviously, Lucas's lore, Lucas's canon is 1 through 6, and first 6 seasons of Clone Wars. Obviously, that is his
Mm-hmm.
story, the story of Anakin Skywalker. And when you get to Clone Wars, it's like, here's what George's thoughts on the Mandalorians are. This is what George's Mandalorians are, and they're
Mm-hmm.
very different from Karen Travis's Mandalorians.
True.
When he talks about, post Endor stories, that's not what my Star Wars. See what George is saying. He's like, yeah, because that's not what I would have done if you given me control. Tim Zahn has a very different canon. His canon of how the universe should work, what the Force should be like, etc., etc. And I think every author, we get um a little glimpse of their lore, their canon. If you asked us to, like, hey, write if we got both the same assignment of, hey, write a significant event of Star Wars, same point, and then we'll pick which one we like. I think we're
Yeah.
gonna have very different opinion of looks at what Star Wars
Sure.
Galaxy is, its lore, its canon.
What
I
the
mean,
most pivotal moment is?
not just with the pivotal. I mean, obviously, it's not like we're gonna like say Darth Vader doesn't, like. I'm not. We're not. One of us aren't gonna go like Darth Vader
Sure.
doesn't exist in my canon. But like, like maybe someone would say, hey, describe that background thing. Make a book about that.
Right.
You and I are gonna have two very different things. Like, what's that background thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, whatever the situation entails. Um, and I think even when I mean, obviously authors work together, and obviously you're not going to ignore each other, but it's like, you do get a sense that everyone has a different canon, a different background, or how we got here.
Mm-hmm.
To play a little. Well, nah, I mean, I don't consider this direct work. It's like, JJ and Ryan had very probably different background ideas of how we
Yeah.
got to their points that we got to, and obviously JJ got to answer that one with Palpatine. And now we're kind of filling in that gap a little more with some of the newer stuff, or with Bloodline too. Um, so I think
Yeah.
from an artistic standpoint, every Star Wars author brings to them a canon, and because it's sort of like their view of Star Wars, their view of what the galaxy is like, and even sometimes just if they're allowed to give background information on things, what their background thoughts on, like what they thought the history of the Sith was compared to what George Lucas thought, and etc.,
Yeah.
etc. So yeah, that's kind of just a thought I had as we're going to talk about these
Mhm.
authors. Is I think every one of these authors has their own individual canon, their own Star Wars. And every time they release a book or we see a show or whatnot, we're getting a little peek into what their Star Wars is at the end of the day. It's like looking through a different mirror.
Yeah. I mean, we can expand it even further than that. Like, what's your canon? What's my canon? What's the canon of someone who, in I don't know, in 1999, in 2005, was like, oh, those prequels, they don't exist. That's a different canon. Like Obi-Wan and Yoda talking on a log. Think about this. I mean, it's a different text. It's a different film. uh, Return of the Jedi is a different film for someone who believes the prequels exists versus the people who don't. And there were people who out there who did, who totally, even up to recently, or like just axe the all three movies. And I'm wearing this T-shirt just despite them, but no, not despite them, but to hang my hat and say, yeah, the original trilogy, the text itself changed in 1999 in an instant. Is the concretized what is specifically happening and what it looks like and what it feels like, what it sounds like. And that was a challenge. That was the change. And that's what people struggled with, I think, in a lot of ways, because it wasn't what they thought it was. There's that video we still have, I could upload it. I don't feel like it, but Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message and the content is the audience. So expand that to, we all have a different canon. We all have a different perception of what Star Wars is because we all have different lives and different ways of relating to material, relating to each other, relating to ourselves. There is a common ground. There's a commonality, but yeah, I mean, we all have a way into it. I mean, so Joel, here's the question. I'll put you on the spot.
Ooh.
What, in your mind, is the most pivotal moment in the entire entire saga of the Galaxy Far Away? In the entire Skywalker saga, what's the most pivotal moment in the entire Skywalker saga?
The destruction of the Death Star in the New Hope.
Really, the first one. I wouldn't even have thought that would be the most pivotal moment. That's interesting, because most people would probably say the destruction of the second Death Star and the overthrow of Palpatine in Return of the Jedi. I would say the fall of Anakin Skywalker, become Darth Vader in Revenge of the Sith. But again, that's because again, so that kind of underscores the point, right? That we all, not that any of us are wrong,
right?
We all have good reasons, but yeah, content is the audience.
I also want to just kind of clarify when I say like every author has a canon. I'm not saying Tim Zahn's all of a sudden like going to like start ignoring Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones if he gets to write a book in 2005. I mean, he got to, and it's called Outland Flight. But it takes place in between episode 1 and 2, so he actually gets to use Anakin and Obi-Wan and all that stuff. But it's clearly still in Zahn's canon, because he's once again adding his whole Thrawn saga, outbound flight, just ascendancy thing. And what's also kind of funny, and I'm going to use like 2 more examples before we move on. Is I was rereading Tarkin, and I'm also bringing up Bazan again too. I'm reading Tarkin, and there's a flashback. It's talking about James Luceno. That's crucial, and he's talking, and Palpatine into the flashback where Palpatine's talking to young Tarkin. It's like, hey, you should get into politics, and then Palpatine's going like, my mentor helped me get into politics too. And when you read that book, James Luceno, as far as James Luceno is concerned, his canon, the Plagueis book is still in his own canon. His own personal canon in terms of what he's been creating with Star Wars. And Tim Zahn has gone on record plenty of times saying, as far as he's concerned, all of Thrawn's Legends history is pretty much the same. As far as he's concerned, Thrawn's going to die, coming back to the known galaxy and trying to take over, and that's where Last Command is where he dies, more or less. and the Thrawn books that took place in Legends prior to the Ascendancy trilogy, pretty much canon. Outbound Flight, as far as he's concerned, that happened. So
Yeah.
that's Zahn's canon still when making those books. So those are just kind of another example of like that. Those are those authors' canon.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good thing of saying what is guiding these authors, what is guiding
Mhm.
their storytelling choices, their
Right.
character choices
Mhm.
as they make them. Because again, I mean, we all have a way of engaging it all. It's also because of everything that's come before, right? We bring that's how the content becomes the audience is the content because of what we bring into engaging the material. Um,
Right.
what we're talking about here is authors being audience, and that's another funny thing that's happened as Star Wars fans, as everyone creating Star Wars, except for
Mhm.
Tony Gilroy. Tony Gilroy, I think he's he's getting an appreciation for it. Is a Star Wars fan. Tony Gilroy is still part of the Star Wars audience. I'd say two things I want to say there is, I mean, anything, you know, anything until it gets contradicted.
Well, that's
Sure.
true.
I mean, fair game. There's a certain TV show that's coming. Next episode's coming out in about 24 hours. That might change some things, might fudge some things. Um, but that until then, and again, there's still ways of letting that use uh, you letting you use those 90s novels to drive storytelling and character choices for sure. And that's just interesting, that's just important to know. um, Another example I'll use, you want to talk about canon, is authors who've really had a hand in a lot of different things, able
Oh
to
yeah.
see things through. And the name, of course, I come up with is Charles Soule. Right.
Oh yeah.
The moment Mask shows up at Lando, and
Yeah.
then it comes in all the way through in different places, and finally shows up at the end of the Darth Vader run, his Darth Vader run. The moment inhabits it and whatnot. Inhabits the mask itself and helps Vader build the castle. You know, the
Oh
bringing
yeah.
all that together, bringing all that in. Yeah, I mean,
It
there's
was.
definitely that. And I mean, things. All the Luminous authors being able to incorporate things that they've written. I
It's.
mean, even talking about Starlight Squadron with
Mhm.
the the Damerons, right? Uh,
It's.
bringing that up. So yeah, go ahead.
It's always, we'll probably talk about Charles Soule later, but
Yeah.
just in terms of this conversation, it's always great when authors do get to kind of keep building on themselves.
Mhm.
In Legend we had that Tim Zahn built on himself, and that's why
Yeah.
Thrawn has kind of this whole saga around him, kind of where
Sure.
like he's died, but then when Tim Zahn came back, he's like, I'll add more Thrawn things, and then
Mhm.
I'll add more Thrawn things backwards. Or when Troy Dennings got to get his run on Star Wars after the New Jedi Order series,
Mhm.
like he had a very distinct polarizing voice for what he viewed Star Wars. Like he had a very specific tone,
Mhm.
a very specific this is not like this is very much not like George Lucas's Star Wars, just the way like the Force is portrayed and like the
Yeah. Sure.
bleakness almost. But I appreciate it. Just kind of like it can have its own identity even within the
Mhm.
universe. But it's like Troy Dennings, like they called it the Dennings verse because he kind of dominated this like specific chunk of time and sort of like built his own like Star Wars universe. Not necessarily like from scratch. I mean, he was using characters like Luke, Jason, and Han, obviously, but like
Sure.
very much a distinct period of time.
Mhm.
It is something I do feel like in some ways not a lot of canon authors have gotten to have, with like some exceptions like Charles Soule and maybe Claudia
Yeah.
Gray.
The lock of
Um,
hair, that was brilliant.
Claudia Gray, that's for sure. Tim
Mhm.
Zahn kind of has that again, but he's in his
Yeah.
own way with his own things.
Mhm.
Um, but Delilah Dawson kind of not really. Like she kind of got
Yeah, I
it
mean, like
in miniature.
what's her name?
Vi
Yeah,
Marati.
Alrighty,
I
yeah,
wish we got another book with her. She was fun.
yeah.
But
Mhm.
it's always again, it's sort of that. I once joked on Facebook. If you really think about it, there are several Star Wars universes, and it's kind of like every author is sort of like a Star Wars universe in itself.
Right.
Um, it's just something I think about from like the
Yeah.
people who, especially for like folks who are like, I always advocate, don't
Mhm.
have like this uber strict version of canon because you're never gonna be happy.
Mhm.
But it's certainly like kind of look at it from every author, from every Star Wars story is like a mirror through someone's lens. You know, you got
Yeah.
the Lucas lens, the Gilroy lens, the Filoni lens, the Charles Soule lens, Claudia Gray lens, Tim Zahn lens, etc., etc., etc.
Mhm. All those names that we will again be
Yeah,
repeating in the second half of the show. But
but that's
yeah,
fine.
very very important thing to think about. Again, they're not disconnected from each other. It's just yeah, authors who are able to make their mark, have their stamp. I'll just mention quickly my week in Star Wars. I finally finished Cataclysm
Woohoo!
by Lydia King. Yeah, quick thought there. It was stronger when it focused on the main four characters. Like uh, Ziri and Fantu and Gela and Axel. Kind of drifted a bit when it focused on other characters, and I understand why. It's kind of funny. When everything takes place simultaneously, and that's kind of how High Republic works. But tell us to read Cataclysm and then Path of Vengeance, and so I finally started Path of Vengeance. It starts with Marta. I immediately love it. Marta,
I gotta read Path of Vengeance.
debating with Yana in that first prologue about how they're gonna Jeddah and they're gonna teach people the way the error of their ways, and Yana's like, yeah, they're not gonna fly. And yeah, it's really it's promises. Kevin Scott promises to pick up what I hope picks up and deal with those questions, but and just see where Marta goes as a character, because uh, she's one of the best characters in all of High Republic for sure, in my opinion. But that's my week. That's my week in Star Wars. Tractor Review. That was fun. Check that out as well for all the comics I read and Chris read. Okay, let's move right along. Speaking of an author who is able to pick up stuff from his Legends material in canon, John Jackson Miller, Return of a Legend. He is back with Star Wars The Living Force, set to release April 9th, 2024. This just dropped. We're doing this good old-fashioned news story style. Got the IO9 article right here. And Joel, you're going to read out in chunks. We're going to break it down. We're going to chat about it. And have
All
at
right,
it.
chunk one. The Jedi Order, and specifically the Council that leads it, has made a lot of mistakes throughout its history, especially the declining days of the Old Republic. And now, a new Star Wars novel is going to explore one Jedi's attempt to get its members to see just that, with a road trip and a few pirates along the way. IO9 can exclusively reveal that the next Star Wars novel from publisher Random House World will see writer John Jackson Miller, the author behind the expanded universe classics such as Kenobi and the Dark Horse comic series Knights of the Old Republic, return to long-form Star Wars fiction for the first time since the 2013 Rebels prequel novel A New Dawn. Dang. Miller's Star Wars The Living Force focuses on the Jedi Council just 1 year before the events of The Phantom Menace. Many of my Star Wars work. Oh, and this is him talking, John Jackson Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Many of my Star Wars works have explored what it means to be a Jedi alone, cut off from the Jedi Order. The organization came in for criticism in those books, and I found myself sympathizing with Qui-Gon Jinn, who felt they'd lost touch. Miller said in a comment provided to IO9. So when Random House Worlds in brackets editor Tom Holler invited me to develop a story for the Jedi Council in the last year before The Phantom Menace, I knew exactly what I wanted to do.
All right, very very exciting news there, and great job by IO9 breaking this article and getting them to. Kudos to them for being able to do this and provide this news for us. Joel, I'll throw this to you first. John Jackson Miller, writing a prequel novel. What do you think? What do you feel?
Oh, I mean, I'm glad John Jackson Miller just coming back in general. Wish they could get James Luceno out of retirement too.
That's true.
Where's my Count Dooku novel? Look, our Notebook. He could. He's like on my top list. But no, it's interesting for sure that he's gonna come back. I'm very curious how this book will feel because sometimes especially like if you read Catalyst or even Tarkin, they do feel like, oh, these do feel like older books from like the Legends era. It's kind of weird to like kind of figure out like why does reading this feel different from reading this today? And something's in the air. I'm very curious if there's going to like a feel of like, oh, this does feel like an old school Legends prequel novel from like the early 2000s. I can't really describe what that means. I don't know, but I know it's a thing. I know it in deep down in my gut.
Me too. Yeah.
Little hesitant about a lot of more Jedi criticism stories. Feel like
Mhm.
I mean, we got enough of that, and
Mm.
you could all debate on whether or not the prequels were even about criticizing the Jedi in general. But hey, if Jackson Miller can give some really deep characterizations to the council members in general, I mean that's always fun.
Mhm.
So I'm looking forward to that. If I had like a critique in general, or just like I always find the plots a little underwhelming and not interesting because I just feel like they're just not allowed to do sweeping things because all the sweeping things that already happened. It's called the prequels. It's called the prequel movies. That's
Mhm.
where all the cool stuff happens.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of been like, don't care about the plot. Try a lot. Like, I like the
Yeah.
kind of the bigger plotting stories. But yeah, it's John Jackson Miller is coming back. That's great. I hope they can get some other legends authors who are still alive to do something
Mhm.
eventually because that'd be great. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so as I implied, he wrote a short story in the A New Hope Fakpov, and and that really brought in things from the Kenobi novel, the IARC, and just the whole thing about the Tuscans going on there. So, and this is set at a different time. I mean, from what I recall, a lot of the like early 2000s prequel novels were more tie-ins proper, more looking at the events of the films. I think that Mace Windu novel, uh, the both all the James Luceno novels were
Oh,
all
so
what are
good.
the political machinations and the character machinations going on that we
They were
then
so
see
good.
on screen, but what's going on just under the surface and behind the scenes and just in the backstory in the background and kind of connecting the dots and making sense of things. This, I think, I mean, you talk about plot. It's interesting. You talk about how the Jedi criticism uh, novel, if you will. I mean, the thing for me is always what are the ideas behind it, right? I mean, I think about Path of Vengeance. What's the idea? What are the ideas behind it about the Force and about faith and about institutions and what does that say to our time? How is that using the language of these characters and these events and their beliefs to talk about our day and our life in the real world? But also, yeah, what does it say about these characters themselves? What does it say about Qui-Gon that he's uh, trying to critique the rest of the council again? We've seen this multiple times, and I'll get to that in a minute. What does it say? I mean, I'm just fascinated that Most Worlds, they asked, Tom Heller here asked John Jackson Miller to develop this story just before the Phantom Menace. I mean, I'll say this right now, and I'll say this again in a minute. Um, was the relationship with Claudia Gray's Master and Apprentice? Because that's set just a few years before that. With these same characters, what is this? How does this relate to the High Republic? That's another thing that's changed is we have those stories. This is paper canon. How are these going to connect somehow? Maybe not literally, maybe not. Maybe we'll hear Keith Trennis's name. We might not, but uh how does that connect? That, I mean, in that case, what involvement do the Luminous authors have in this? Obviously, John Jackson Miller, he knows how to spin his own story, knows how to develop and think about characters. But and I mean, that's another thing. He hasn't really written much, from what I gather. He hasn't written much in this era. That's another new thing, right? He's written, and he wrote Knights of the Old Republic, wrote Kenobi, and then he wrote A New Dawn. I forget what else he's written, but I mean, he's written lots of Star Trek. So there, I mean, that's another thing to think about, right? Another uh, universe where the institution is actually more of a protagonist, right? Starfleet and Federation, they're uh, more the good guys, and so that gets complicated in more recent years, of course, because we don't believe institutions are necessarily good guys anymore. But uh, yeah, that to say, okay, what is it saying in 2024? Aspirationally, critically, talk about criticism. So yeah, I'm fascinated. It's a fascinating choice. It's an exciting choice, but it's odd. It's just an odd, not odd in a bad way, but it's just surprising that they got him to write this, and maybe not James Luceno. I mean, if James Luceno had written this, we'd be thinking, oh yeah, political intrigue, everything to do with um, you know with everything we saw in the Darth Plagueis novel. But no, it's John Jackson Miller who writes. I mean, definitely writes a political intrigue story, a backstory, a good character story. A New Dawn definitely dives into character, Kanan and Hera and their interaction, everything that builds up there. But there's also, everything, the Empire and their mining operations and and Sloan and everything happening with that. So that's well written. It's a good novel to check out. But yeah, this is interesting. And in 10 years, how's John Jackson Miller's perspective changed? How has his style changed? All these fascinating questions we don't know the answer to until we finally read them. But he's sympathetic to Qui-Gon. So we might be able to find out. But then there's another question: is what's the nuance there? Is there a nuance there that it's not so cut and dry? I mean, that's the wonderful thing with Claudia Gray. She was able to say, okay, yeah, Qui-Gon, she understands where he's coming from. Here comes Obi-Wan. There's this interaction with Obi-Wan, who brings this other perspective. Very, very curious to see just what that interaction looks like above all. But all right, go ahead to chunk number 2.
Well, I'll just say, I think John Jackson Miller's a good fit for this. Like if they were doing if they're doing more of a sequel to Captain Scott's Count Dooku and got James Luceno, that'd make more sense in my mind because I think James Luceno has always wanted to do Count Dooku book.
That'd be interesting.
Also, I'm curious if John Jackson Miller were bringing the Knights of the Old Republic stuff. That was his comic in the early 2000s. So
it's possible if they delve into ancient lore too.
Yeah. Okay, so chunk number 2. The Living Force will see Qui-Gon alongside his Padawan learner Obi-Wan Kenobi implore the Jedi Council to think beyond the confines of a chamber at the heart of the galactic core on Coruscant, with another ancient Jedi outpost on the planet Quinn, we can call it Quinn, is set to be decommissioned. After Qui-Gon pushes the order to stop turning inward and serve the people of the galaxy, the entire council, Mace Windu, Yoda, Yaddle, Depa Palava, Oberyn Sissus, Even Peel, Yarl Poof, Plo Koon, East Cost, Stacey Tin, Kiara Moody, and Adi Gallia, find itself venturing to Quinn on a mission of outreach. Except the problem with the outreach means that some folk are going to take the rare opportunity of the Jedi Council leaving Coruscant to make a play to wipe out the Jedi leadership in one fell swoop. With some counselors trying to see the future, while others are reeling under the bureaucratic demand of an increasingly corrupt republic, Qui-Gon challenges them to get out of the council chamber and rediscover the Jedi ways used to be, Miller explained. Their response is a road trip for all 12 counselors, giving us our first in-depth adventure with many of them, and a look into the side of the galaxy that can't be seen from their temple on Coruscant. We also learn what it's like to live in the immediate pre-prequel era, whether you're a civilian, a member of the nascent Republic military, or in the Underworld. I'm delighted to return to the Star Wars universe for the story that's jam-packed with adventure for the counselors, and for Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to boot, Miller concluded. As the former later says, to the latter.
So Qui-Gon says to Obi-Wan,
in the Phantom Menace, be mindful of the living force.
Yeah. So I'll dive in there.
Yeah, you go first.
Really, fascinating, giving us a little more insights into what's happening. Again, the council being out of touch, right? Qui-Gon wanting the order to stop turning inwards and serve the peoples of the galaxy. That's where my mind goes to Keeve Trennis, because that's precisely what I think her whole complaint was, her whole grief was. We know there's some things happening about how Yoda doesn't trust her, and so people end up dying. There's more tragedy that ends up happening there. But from what my sense, the thing I've built up in my mind at least, is that she was pushing, the orders kind of sequester themselves in the temple here, and they need people in the galaxy need them. And so here's another example, right, of this outpost being decommissioned, being shut down. They're pulling up stakes, they're heading out, basically hunkering down even more, just the continuation of everything that began with Charles Soule's Eye of the Storm comic, right? The general retreat into the temple that I guess had to gradually happen over these 200 years. And and here it is, just the continual erosion of the Jedi place in the galaxy. This is why I think about the relationship with the High Republic, right? Because it's showing that final moment, this novel, and of course the Phantom Menace itself, showing that final moment where they're just completely inside and really, I mean, it's more complicated than that. They're trying to do what they can do, and it's 200 years of these habits developing over time. But of course, we see what happens, how they become the generals
So
in the Clone Wars.
this
So
is why I also think
yeah,
again the High Republic is going against the prequels, though. Because
that's
I
true.
feel
Agree.
like that. Because I actually agree with the council. I think the council is right to not believe Qui-Gon in some ways in Phantom Menace. Because
Okay.
why should they believe a Sith is back? It's been 1,000 years of nothing. If you have a
So
1,000 years of nothing,
I don't see here about being the Sith being back. I mean more just people being out in the galaxy, needing the Jedi to be the guardians of peace and justice, and that they aren't doing that. And here's another example. And what I find fascinating is, why did it go on this road trip, right? It's this PR campaign to say, oh yeah, we're not really abandoning you. We'll still come and see and whatnot. It's a whistle stop tour. It's like a politician who never visits. That's I mean, maybe it's a safe state or whatever, saying we don't care about you. We're just not going to pay attention to you. Um, but we're going to come and visit just to make sure you don't think we don't care about you. And and so it's going to be this. I think Qui-Gon's critique here is it's going to be this empty gesture, and the pirates are going to expose this empty gesture for what it is. Um, Again, I'm saying the thing this gets me thinking then is it isn't necessarily as nuanced. I hope maybe it is more nuanced, especially because we get the perspectives. Like maybe this is what you're getting at here. We get the perspectives of the Jedi Council. We get all these other characters again that we haven't had much of. We've only, we had more of Yaddle in Cataclysm than in anything else, even in more than in Tales of the Jedi. Now all these other characters we just haven't had much in. I mean, I guess maybe again phase one of the High Republic. Here we have them right on the eve of the revelation of the Sith, right on the eve um, of the Phantom Menace and of the blockaded trade routes and everything that goes down. And yeah, maybe it will get into that. On that point, that's a bit of a tangent, but on that point, yeah, I know I get what you mean, right?
I mean, yeah,
They've been away for 1,000 years. That could be a conspiracy. That could be who knows, some specter, some ghost specter, whatever. Not to quote the Rebels crew, but I get that. But also, maybe to your point, the habit of thought, the way you've known that the universe, if especially if they're younger masters, even the older ones who maybe seen more, they're still okay. It's been 200 years, things are all right. Why change? Why break what isn't broken? What we don't think is broken? And so here's Qui-Gon saying, oh, actually, it is broken because we're being complacent. But that's
uh,
that's a
yeah.
whole well that's maybe hopefully the big ideas of this novel. Sorry.
I guess,
Anyway, what do
I
you
guess,
think?
I guess another thing though is that if you just watch Phantom Menace by itself,
Yeah,
I don't think Phantom Menace says anywhere that the Jedi have stopped being guardians of peace and justice for people. Because the
no,
movie opens up with two Jedi going to Naboo trying to stop this Trade
sure,
Federation from blockading the planet. They don't win, but
yeah,
and obviously Jedi, they still send and they still let Obi-Wan and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon protect the Queen, so they're still doing something. You sure they're not going to send the whole
yeah,
Jedi army out to get them, but still Jedi doing stuff. So I don't know. I always felt like I mean, I
yeah.
think that is sort of the retcon of the
That's
new
interesting.
of Star Wars of like again. I don't think Lucas was ever going for the Jedi of the prequel era were decayed. I think this is a very much a new thing that new
Really,
people have
you don't
added
think
on.
so? I mean,
Not really.
well, I'll say this: it's more complicated, right? Um, they get sucked into. I mean, here's the thing: the Attack of the Clones ends with them not being the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. Maybe they think they are by bringing Palpatine's version of peace to the galaxy through war. But
I mean, there's my
yeah,
question: what could have they done? What could have they done differently?
sure. I mean, that's the problem. That's it right there. Is it was already 200 years too late for them to really. I mean, it's never too late to change the course of history. But I guess that's the thing about institutions, right? They all, businesses, corporate interests, private institutions, they have their fiduciary duty, and they have their responsibility to shareholders, and the way they have to hire and elevate people and promote people who are going to crush it and make the bottom line bigger, and that they're going to support the politicians who are going to crush it, make the bottom line bigger, and be under their thumb, and that's just the way it is. And so that's why you need folks like Qui-Gon to say it doesn't have to be that way.
So I would
Yeah.
disagree, and I would say that if Palpatine did the same thing to all the High Republic Jedi, he'd still win. If Palpatine goes up against the High Republic Jedi with his plan, I think he still wins. Because I don't think it is about the Jedi. I think it's just Palpatine outsmarted everybody. He was that good at being evil.
So, okay, what I'm hearing you're saying is it's not the Jedi's fault.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right. And I agree with you. It's not a matter of fault. It's that I don't think that's true with High Republic. I think the whole point is if they had, tried to, I don't know, there wasn't even the institutional means for him to raise an army at that point. Right. That's not the constitution of the Republic. I mean, that'd be an interesting thought experiment, but I don't know. I'll think about that. I mean, I think the point of the High Republic is to say this is the before after picture. Here's the thing with John Jackson Miller's novel: we're coming close to the after picture.
That's true. Yeah.
So.
But
Anyway,
it's going to be nice to kind of at least hopefully get into the heads of these of the council members, and hopefully very nuanced ways. Like, well, if you're gonna try to do this, at least maybe give a more clearer picture of what's going on, at least in your own mind of what the council is supposed to be like. And maybe it's just for marketing's sake, they have to oversimplify it, and it's like, oh, there's actually a really more nuanced picture here than just council bag, Qui-Gon good. We should listen to Qui-Gon. I think that's too simplistic.
And at the end of the day, I do hope that's right. Like I do hope you're right, and I think you probably are. Again, especially because we're getting their point of view, of all these council characters. I mean, that might actually have a big effect on the way we view the prequels. Then, I mean, that's kind of the way these books function, right?
Oh, I mean, I hope so. Yeah. It's like I don't want to. Let's see. I want to check the time here. Because I don't want to get too much to this, but I've always sort of asked myself, Mace Windu's got Palpatine by the sword, and Anakin's like, you got to stand trial. I'm kind of looking at Mace Windu like, well, what's Mace Windu gonna do? Palpatine can zap everybody. Like
that's literally what he says. He
kind of agrees
effectively, right? He says the institutional version of it is he controls the Senate and the courts. He controls the government, controls all the apparatus. He also controls the dark side of the Force, and he didn't know that. So, that's a good point.
And we live in some scary times in the real world. That's like if Palpatine went, got arrested and tried, for all we know, could he go? Well, you're free to go, free citizen Palpatine.
Yeah.
You're maybe not Chancellor anymore, but you're still out there.
Get off on a technicality.
I know. It's like it could happen in the real room.
Here's a good comment here. His duality, right? I gather you mean there, like his ability to be very kind and genteel, old Uncle Palpy, coming out and said undermining everything that they want to do and they care about, like Jar Jar, right? I mean, Jar Jar gets manipulated to thinking he's the hero by granting emergency powers. It's not Jar Jar's fault, guys. It's so that's
right.
Selling the souls.
I mean, it's also like the whole I don't blame the Jedi for Anakin's fault. I blame Anakin because he did stupid stuff. But anyway, I'll read the full symphonist.
Sounds good.
Symphonist. Hang on.
Synopsis. They give the synopsis here. Go for it.
Sorry, hit the burp. Okay. The synopsis of the book. In the year before the Phantom Menace, Yoda, Mace Windu, and the entire Jedi Council confront a galaxy on the brink of change. The Jedi have always traveled the stars, defending peace and justice across the galaxy. But the galaxy is changing, and along with it, the Jedi Order. More and more, the Order finds itself focused on the future of the Republic, secluded on Coruscant, where the 12 members of the Jedi Council weigh the crisis on the galactic scale. As yet another Jedi outpost left over from the Republic Golden Age, all know what that means, is set to be decommissioned on the planet Quinn. Qui-Gon Jinn challenges the Council about the increasing isolation of the Order. Mace Windu suggests a bold response. All 12 Jedi Masters will embark on a goodwill mission to help the planet and remind the people of the galaxy that the Jedi remain as stalwarts and present as they have been across the ages. But the arrival of the Jedi leadership is not seen by all cause for celebration. Warring pirate factions have infected the sector in the increasing absence of the Jedi to maintain the dominance. The pirates unite, intent on assassinating the council, as they are willing to destroy countless innocent lives to secure their power. Cut off from Coruscant, the Jedi Masters must reckon with an unwelcome truth that while no one thinks about the future than the more about the future than the Jedi Council, nobody needs their help more than those living in the present.
So, do you have any further thoughts there?
I wonder if Darth Sidious is going to call up any pirate leader and go like, "Hey, unite! I'm going to pay you. Get rid of these Jedi Council members. We could speed up my world domination plans right now."
Yeah, I never know.
I mean, he might. It's just the whole thing is. I've always felt that the prequels themselves either didn't do a good job, or in my opinion, I don't think with the intent of saying the Jedi of this age are out of touch and kind of living in ivory towers on Coruscant.
Even though it's literally an ivory tower. But
well, yeah, but I don't think that was George's intent in some ways. In fact, George himself has said, "Yeah, this is what the Jedi are supposed to be. They're supposed to be the marshals of the Republic. They are space cops." He said space cops once. So as far as George was concerned, they were very much supposed to be this way. And then when the Clone Wars happens, Palpatine just creates such a crisis. It's like, well, what can we do? Let's say the droid army about to attack everybody. What can we do?
Yeah.
So there's that. Palpatine's machinations held no bars. So it's certainly kind of the retconization of the prequel era to a certain extent of the Jedi getting more and more out of touch with these new things, and kind of this is the backstory to the backstory. It is not Lucas's canon, as we talked about earlier. But I'm still excited to read this, and it looks fun, and I like books that are going to explore these. Like I am glad that we are getting this, because I do think in general, there aren't a lot of, as weird as it is to say, I still don't feel like there's a lot of prequel novels in canon about where's the 20-book series of Mace Windu and how is his story from Phantom Menace to Revenge of the Sith? Let's get deep into Mace Windu's head outside of just
20 comic book run, but
yeah, let's get 100, let's get 700. Where are the books about Kiadi Mundi? What was he like? What were his final thoughts as he was getting mowed down by his troops? So I do think just in general, regardless of whether or not they're going overboard with the criticism of the Jedi suck or not, it's just good to kind of just get these characters fleshed out in some way. Anyway, it's great, So yeah, I'm excited to more or less and to see all the perspectives in one book.
I mean, I wouldn't say so much it's a retcon. I'll throw this up here. It's not so much a retcon. I really do believe that what you believe about the Jedi and how you see the Jedi, not everybody, not exclusively, Joel, I don't know if this is the case for you, but it's what you believe and what you're bringing into it from the real world and from your whatever interaction you may or may not have with real world religions and religious institutions. And
I'm sure that's a big chunk of it, Joe. I'm sure that's where the discourse comes from.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who struggle, especially with bringing my day job, struggle with grew up Catholic and have questions about, okay, do they care about anything that I'm doing or involved in, or the way I live my life, and are they out of touch in certain restrictions and requirements that they have or whatnot? And of course, those in the know it's more complicated, and there's some groups who are having these conversations, having those conversations, and my day job is all about let's all have conversations together. But that I'm really fascinated. Then they do the synopsis really goes into this complexity about change and constancy, about reflecting on the future and reflecting on that change and trying to make sense of it, trying to make sense of a galaxy with a growing underworld. With, I mean, one of the big changes that's happening is this increased polarization between the core and the outer rim, right?
Mhm.
Increased alienation of the outer rim. And so, what is our place? And I don't know if this is so much theology time, but what is our place in maybe upholding constancy, in having a constancy that is flexible, if that's possible, to maintain that contradiction. Having the, but yeah, like you're saying, being kind of in an ivory tower in this seclusion in order to contemplate, in order to speculate, in order to understand what the galaxy means, what the force means, what the force is calling us to. And we need to understand what the force means in order to know what the force is willing us to do. I guess that is still theology time, but then here's the other problem. There is, if all you're doing then is thinking about the future and contemplating and trying to understand things, what if there is a crisis in looming? What if there is the needs of the present that are being dwarfed by this anxiety about the future, right? Anxiety about change. I mean, you want to talk about, here's a secret, guys. whenever you know whenever any kind of leader, and this is maybe not so much the case, but I think a lot of times, and we see this in church discussions, and I'll go on the internet and say this, leaders come out with very harsh, strict, stern, strong statements that we've seen. Some people criticizing the Pope for some of the things some of the conversations he's allowing. Right? There's a real anxiety about the things we know, the things we've known for centuries, for millennia, as we felt them as constant. Things not for centuries, millennia, for decades in our own lives, we felt as constants. And here we are being told, oh no, that isn't how you define a Christian versus someone else. That isn't how you necessarily define a Catholic versus someone else. That the whole defining someone versus someone else may not be the most loving way to live, the most important way to live. And needing to say, okay, fine, what does it mean to then be a Christian, be a Jedi, be a Catholic, be a whoever, be a Muslim, be an atheist, be an agnostic? What does it mean in light of needing to have an open dialogue with the rest of society and with the rest of the galaxy?
Right.
Sorry, I'm talking about. But yeah, and so, I mean, I hope the complexity here, maybe this is Obi-Wan being, sorry, yes, Obi-Wan being a few years on from the Cherka crisis, and a few years on from, Qui-Gon choosing to be his master, Obi-Wan choosing to be his Padawan, stepping him into the master that he's going to be, someone who I think does his best in an impossible situation when everything falls apart in Revenge of the Sith. What the ability to actually say, hold both at once, hold both of these questions at once, be able to have the wisdom to say, I need to go into exile on Tatooine and take care of this boy because he's the future, but I need to actually focus. Then what does that mean in the present? And it means I have to give up everything I've known about the Jedi. It's been taken from me anyway. Yoda on Dagobah, mulling over all the failures of the last 20, 300, 900 years. It's, I mean, I that's another thing that I'm wondering, what does this mean for, how does this set up Obi-Wan going forward? So, yeah, I mean, I do hear what you're saying, right? And I, of all people, need to hear what you're saying because, the way I've come into it, where I come into, bring religious institutions into it, is that it is very complex. And these are real people who are trying to act in good faith. Here's the word, in good faith. Trying to relate to people. Here's a term, charitably, lovingly, openly, with curiosity, but also with clear convictions about what they believe to be true. And it'll be really fascinating to see then. Maybe this is the thing I'm looking forward to most. Is the question you brought up is, what does what do the Jedi Council members think of and feel and care about in light of all this change that is occurring throughout the galaxy?
Well, yeah, I was reading something on a forum a couple of. It was actually had to do with the whole no romance, no attachment rule
Right.
of the Giants. Like, it's like, is this a problem, or is it just Western authors can't understand Eastern philosophy?
Yeah.
Which is probably more likely what the true answer is. But if you're gonna do it, then I think the sweet spot, and this what the person said, and I'll probably read this maybe next week because I think
Yeah.
it's a good post of like make the external outer universe debates we're having, make them in universe debates as well.
Yeah.
Like don't, and that's where the nuance comes in. It's like, don't just say, don't paint the whole brush of like, oh, the Jedi of the prequel era out of touch, and that's why they went, kablooey.
Mhm.
I think I would like, I would love like a really nuanced Luke Skywalker story of
Mhm.
just of like a debate of like, Luke's like trying to figure out, well, why did the Jedi fall in the first place? And then you actually have like an in-universe discussion of like, one side is very much because the Jedi were corrupt and they stuck with the Republic and yada yada yada,
Mhm.
and then the other person was like, well, no, because Palpatine was so machination. I mean, I guess Last Jedi is kind of like that because
Yeah.
ultimately Luke and that movie in particular says Luke's wrong. Everything about Luke is wrong
Yeah.
in that. Not in the hashtag not my Luke Skywalker way. I mean, no, the movie literally comes down on Rey's side.
Yeah.
Rey is pretty much says, like when Luke Skywalker, like, Jedi were arrogant and allowed Darth Sidious to like destroy them from within. At the end of the day, that's why they need to go away. Rey's like, nah, Jedi are we need the Jedi. Luke,
Mhm.
get off your butt. So that's when it's always more fun. So
Yeah.
I hope that this book can kind of capture. I guess it can't capture why the Jedi fell because they're not fallen yet. But it's kind of like, are the Jedi really that bad in this time frame
Mhm.
compared to like their High Republic counterparts, or is it like is it more nuanced than that?
Yeah.
And that's
I
what I hope
mean,
to see.
that's what I love about just the first few pages of Path of Vengeance, for example. You have Marta saying she's a true believer, and you have Yana, as something was mentioning. This is what I was reading today, right? Um,
Hmm.
you know, and this is a very small internal thing, but hopefully it's going to look at the path from the outside and the rest of Christianity's relationship to that very conservative American fundamentalist evangelicalism. There's a bunch of adjectives. That's a fascinating thing because how much do we want to be non-dairy creamer about them? How much do we want to cut them off and ignore them? How much do we have to say, okay, they're also Christians? And to say with the path of the open end, they're also force users. They also have a relationship to the force that
They're Force believers.
they're force believers. I'm sorry, they're not users. That's the point. They're force believers. What is actually good about them, and trying to incorporate that without giving into the core of what they are is ultimately this violent marauding group that they turn into the Nihil. So um, yeah, I mean that's something I'm even curious about phase 3. But yeah, the internal debates. I really like that idea. That's kind of what I want to see. What I want to see, like believers, people of faith, writing Star Wars. I mean, I know Kevin Scott. He's studied things. Louis K. Johnson has studied. I want to see someone of faith. Like the term we use in the lingo in business, come a confessional approach.
I wish
Someone,
we had more people who study Eastern philosophy because that's
yeah,
what the Jedi are actually based on, not Western. We need
sure.
more.
I mean,
Be
yeah,
nice.
that would be great too. Is someone? I mean, I think Charles Soule a little bit. I mean, he did his undergrad actually in college in Chinese literature or something. So yeah, but have someone from those traditions actually incorporate. I mean, I think Visions maybe tried to, but yeah, let's do this in canon. Yeah, it's a great idea. Great point.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, but yeah, I think we'll wrap up this part of the conversation here because we've been going on for quite a while.
Yeah,
But nope, I'm looking forward to this book. John Jackson Miller. It's always great to see a Legends author's returned. Bring back Michael Stackpole. Give me some
yeah.
X-wings. Um,
We need to bring back James Lucino. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. He's getting older, so bring him back soon.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you can't do Snoke, at least give him a Count Dooku book or something.
yeah.
Um,
Also, a sequel to something that's come. There we go.
oh,
Yeah.
and also, you're welcome, Laura. I'm glad you're enjoying us.
Mhm.
Um, all right, so let's do a spotlight on the authors. So, Matthew and I decided, this isn't really a top five list so much as it is we just picked some authors, but we picked five because we want to keep things somewhat
Mhm.
steady of, of authors that we felt we want to give the spotlight to and just talk about them, what they bring to the table, all this good stuff. So, do you want to just do my list and then your list like that, or do you want to do Snake again?
You start with your honorable mentions, and then I'll do my honorable mention, and then yeah, how about that?
Okay, so
Yeah.
I have two honorable mentions,
Mhm.
and they are both canon novelists,
Mhm.
but I felt a little unfair putting them in here because I don't know, it feels odd. And those two are James Luceno and Timothy Zahn. Obviously, I love James Luceno. I think his Legends work is some of the best there is. Plagueis, Labyrinth of Evil, Dark Lord, Rise of Darth Vader, Unifying Force for New Jedi Order. If you can get through all 19 books, etc., etc. Great stuff.
Mhm.
Really some of the best. Obviously for canon, he's working Tarkin, which is a lot of fun, and Catalyst, not Cataclysm, Catalyst, a Rogue One tie-in novel,
Mhm.
and the gold standard pretty much for any tie-in novel of that's how you do it. Catalyst is my opinion the
Yeah,
gold standard,
that's true.
and nothing has beat it really
I'll agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that.
so far. Even the
Mhm.
Last Jedi connected stuff, sadly.
Mhm.
It's the one tiny flaw in a perfect movie is that it's tie-in material just
Anyway,
doesn't really tie in as much as you
I
hope.
mean, okay. Here's a question, just an
Hmm.
aside. So, Catalyst is a tie-in proper.
Yeah.
How about like the road to the Last Jedi, the road to the Force Awakens, those campaigns, those marketing campaigns?
Well, I would consider them tie-in because they have like Road to the Flash Jedi.
Okay, because
So
I think
yes,
some of the Claudia Gray ones are pretty good, but anyway, we'll get into her.
I think there's some thematic stuff, but I feel
Yeah,
like something about Catalyst is just so. It's
yeah,
like the backstory to the backstory. It's like the
yeah.
back. It's like the opening crawl if you done made it a movie, which is
Mhm.
funny because it's like that's what Rogue One is. It's the opening crawl to New
True.
Hope.
Yeah, that's true.
While like Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and Phasma, it's like I don't really need them to understand and get the thematic gist of the movie a little bit. Like Holdo and like Leia's like thematically important, but like it's not like a direct backstory. And
I'll
then
I'll
Phas
I'll talk about her in a bit. I'll talk about that.
and then Phasma is
Yeah,
Phasma dies. So she ain't important. But I mean
yeah, it is
I love
important.
those books as they are, but
Mhm.
in terms of like their tie-in.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
Timothy's on, I'll say something big and bombastic and you can disagree with me, but I actually might die on this hill on this one. Timothy Zahn is the most impactful Star Wars author of all time. Just no doubt. I think no one has beat him yet in terms of his impact on Star Wars and just incendiary takes with me. Yay! Like none of the canon authors I feel like have beat him. No one has just like fundamentally just created a fan base of what they think Star Wars is in terms of wanting that's more sci-fi. Like Tim Zahn didn't create the Star people who want Star Wars to be sci-fi military stuff,
Mhm.
but he's certainly their standard bearer for sure.
Yeah.
And he is one of the founding foundations of the post Endor expanded universe that lasted for like 30 years. Everything just comes from that. Obviously, Thrawn is now here, and his work is inspiring newer things. Um, I just feel like Zahn's legacy on Star Wars it's up there like with George in some ways. Like I
Mhm.
think, I don't like I haven't feel like an author yet has like fundamentally shifted even High Republic I don't feel like has fundamentally shifted people's perspective of Star Wars uber much to be like we want more of a sci-fi military franchise, which I feel
It's
like
an interesting thought.
Legends definitely kind of play on in a lot of ways. So, but obviously Tim Zahn's
Mhm.
work is kind of more to the side in canon, the Thrawn stuff
Yeah.
doing kind of its own thing. So that's why those two are my honorable mentions. because they're great and I love them, but I just it's weird to think of them as canon authors. I feel like they're
Mhm,
like the last leftovers of legend stuff in some way. Um,
mhm,
just by working, obviously, Catalyst is a canon tie-in novel.
mhm.
So yeah, those are my two honorable mentions.
Okay, that's interesting. You mentioned why they're just honorable mentions, right? As opposed to part of your list. Yeah, I mean, Zahn's impact on the EU, right? If this were 2012 or whatever, I mean, Zahn would have to be on both of our lists, right? Um, I do see what you mean. It's just hard. It's hard to measure impact like that, but I mean, those three novels, at the beginning of the '90s, I haven't even read them, and I've read the graphic novel, but I don't. I'll sad to admit that on this podcast, but that I haven't read those three novels. They're legends, but I mean, they are the primordial Star Wars novel, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
not, I guess, technically primordial, right? Spectre of the Mind's Eye is the primordial novel, but
Yeah.
the Thrawn trilogy is what every Star Wars novel ended up being, right? A fully fledged, fully
Mhm.
thought out staple of the literary genre of the the pop sci-fi, but like Tor and Random House Worlds and Delray or whatever. But yeah, yeah, I see what you mean there in terms of just the long term impact. We'll see. I mean, we'll see in the the 10. It's been only 10 years since the changeover. Whole bunch of new authors to see what what that kind of, if there is someone who looking back that we can now look back 30 years and see, okay, yeah, we'll see. I mean, see, in 20 years we'll look back to 2013, that early era. Will it be Chuck Wendig? Will it be will be Claudia Gray? Who knows? But yeah, it's a good point, and also good to say why they're just honorable mentions in that they are more legends authors that have their moments in canon. I mean, Zahn has 6 books in canon, but they're kind of on this side thing. So yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
No,
Maybe.
yeah, it's like Zahn stuff just feels like a continuation of what he was doing with Thrawn and
Yeah.
Legends. So
Mhm.
yeah, those are my honorable mentions. Your
So
honorable mentions?
my honorable mention: Honourable in the King's English.
Yeah.
Yeah, E.K. Johnston.
Mhm.
Uh, and I haven't said this too much on this podcast because, yeah, my actual opinion of E.K. Johnston's work is, for me, I'm almost 40. I'm a dude. Uh, I feel like it's kind of mixed. I feel like so I'll say, her ability to take up a character, definitely, Queen's Hope and that whole conflict, the complicated nature of, Padme and Sabe, uh, in that novel, really well written, really more mature, more grown up, and more complex, and I appreciated that. She starts off her novels really well, and starts off, um, with setting the scene. I mean, even the beginning of Queen's Peril. Where's the Queen's Peril? Yeah, the one that's set during the Phantom Menace, where, yeah, it's, Padme and her handmaidens, and setting that scene, exploring characters and exploring the complexity of those characters, all trying to come around Padme and, this new reign, this new queen, and create this court and the incredibly talented women that you Panaka and them are able to find. She's able to develop it. I think she struggles a bit with finishing stories. I mean, that's also an inevitable Victorian thing. Feels like it ends kind of quickly.
Yeah.
I like those novels. This is her independent novel. Incredible world building in that novel. Really love it. They're about Anglican sci-fi. It's the closest thing we got. Um, you really love it. If you are a younger demographic, if you maybe more identify more female, I'd be curious to hear what you think, of her writing. She may be your favorite author. That would be great. I love it. Here for that. Um, I will read everything she writes, and I'll enjoy everything she writes. Really looking forward to Crimson Climb. I hope that gets more complex, and I hope that finishes strong in a way that convincing and follows along. So that's why she's my honorable mention, because uh, she's definitely someone to look at, and definitely someone who connects with younger audiences. Her social media presence connects with younger audiences, and yeah, I mean, she's able to delve into. I mean, you talk about young adult fiction as the emotional core of a young person, and the anxieties and hopes, and just the epic range of feelings that young people have. She really captures those really well. It's just, okay, how do you resolve this story? How to bring it to conclusion? I think we could have more. I mean, I think about Queen's Peril, and like I wanted to actually go into more about the Phantom Menace and about the events of that movie, that film, as it plays out with these characters. And so, yeah, again, worth picking up, worth checking out. Definitely want to support local. Definitely want to interview her and give her that platform. But yeah, maybe for maybe a bit more different demographics. It's an exercise in saying, okay, this is for other people who live a different kind of life than I do. That's fair. But that's my honorable mention is E.K. Johnston. Southern Ontario is E.K. Johnston. There we go.
Good pick.
There we
Good.
go. Southwest Ontario. Have you read any of her stuff or listened to her audiobooks? Or
No, I don't really listen to a lot of the original works of the Star Wars authors.
okay.
I've only listened to their Star Wars stuff.
No, I was saying, have you listened to her Star Wars novels?
Oh yeah, I've done the entire. No, I didn't do the entire. I did the first and the last of the Queen trilogy.
Okay.
I don't know why I skipped the middle one. I did read Ahsoka early on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of got the same feelings of you. It's like her plot just kind of stop. Like in the third one, it's like there's this Nemoidian thing, and it's like that never really gets resolved. Um, uh, but I do like the relationship with like Sabe and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of. I was never a big fan of her Ahsoka book, so that's why I would like the whole retcon thing happened. I didn't really care enough. Like I don't even really like the Ahsoka story that much.
Especially her world building, her political world building. Talking about Naboo and the brain drain to America. I mean, Naboo from Naboo or to Naboo. I mean, possibly. That planet within Ahsoka, that planet, the Empire. This is one of the first looks at the Empire really exploiting a planet and the effect of it has on people. And so, yeah, worth checking out. Worth checking out. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So I think what we'll do is I'll do my first two, and then you can do your first two. And
that
then
works.
I'll do my last two, my next two, and then do your next two, and then I'll do my last one, and then you
Okay,
do your last one.
sounds good.
So okay. So my first one, just on the list. There's no real like best words. Just kind of put them
Yeah,
in the random order.
this isn't the listicle. This is just
Yeah. So my first one, Alexander Freed. I put Alexander Freed because he's a very unique Star Wars author.
Mhm.
His work is it's like a very operatic, but also darker toned military kind of story.
Mhm.
Like Alphabet Squadron is like one of my favorite, one of the better books of Star Wars out there, especially for like if you want to look at like the post and aftermath era. Essentially, it
Mhm.
takes place during the aftermath era. It's like
Right.
a story within that story. Um, and it is. People said it was like, oh, it's like the X-wing novels. Like, no, I think it's more serious than the X-wing novels, and it's like one of the really few times we get like nuanced discussions on redemption, forgiveness. Like the character is
Mm.
an ex-imperial pilot who defects to the New Republic after the second Battle of Endor. It's like dealing with the consequences. Like not everyone's gonna forgive you, and just kind of trying to find your place in that. And yeah, and the Alpha Squadron ends so fascinating, where it's like her squad mates and I want to say like some former Imperial pilots just kind of get together for like a veterans thing. It's after the
Mhm.
war, and they just kind of talk. It's like it's
Mhm.
very that boots on the ground, the grunt. Um, and there's lots of deep look into it, and obviously it's like there's some spy stuff. So
Mhm.
if you're looking for like a really nuanced take on like what the soldier of, or in this case the pilot of Star Wars is, Alexander Freed's got you there with both
Mhm.
Twilight Company and especially the Alpha Squadron trilogy. Um,
I have
so
a
that's
question about Alexander Freed. Would you say he's a successor to Tim Zahn in that military sci-fi?
no, because Tim Zahn was more grander, like general versus general, like admiral
Okay.
versus admiral. This is more like the average soldier, pilot person, just kind of going through, in the trenches, like you
So
know.
it's different enough. Okay.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, it's different, very different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, in that sense.
Mhm.
Although hair is in it. So that's nice.
Mhm.
In the Alpha Squadron trilogy. So very unique. They have a very unique style. And that's something I've sort of thought about when picking my list, was like
Mhm.
Star Wars books that just sort of stand out and don't just feel like, here's some Star Wars. It's like, oh, this is like
Yeah.
this is military Star Wars. It's like, there's no Jedi coming to save you this time. Well, that's not true for all these, but
Yeah.
so Alexander Freed, very much look him up, read his stuff. Um, Next one is a weird one, but I really liked, but I think it's because of what they did, and that is Ray Carson,
Mhm.
who wrote the Rise of Skywalker novel. They also did a solo tie-in novel too, which I never read.
Mhm.
Um, it really is just because of the Rise of Skywalker novelization, which
Interesting.
is,
Yeah.
I think, my favorite of the canon novelizations we've gotten. Oh, by the way, Alexander Freed also did Rogue One, so that should tell you a little bit of what his kind of
Yep.
style is. In terms of like, so like if you like Rogue One and want more Star Wars books that feel like Rogue One, Alexander Freed's your guy.
Mhm.
Back to Ray Carson. So yeah, a lot of it is just because she did the Rise of Skywalker
Yeah.
novelization and took kind of the Rise of Skywalker movie and kind of was able to like form a cohesive narrative and thematic around the whole movie.
Mhm.
Which is very readable and very fun. Like, I loved listening to it. And I sort of live that movie through that book, so more than the movie
Yeah.
itself. So yeah, that's kind of why I picked her. So that's kind of my spotlight. She did Rise of Skywalker novelization. I think it's one of the better novelizations
And she
of
also
at least
did
canon.
the other Kira novel, which I have.
Yeah.
Up that
She
way.
have the prequel to Solo.
Yeah. Does her novel, does that novelization, does that, you always liked Rise of Skywalker? Did that help you really like it, or did it improve your appreciation of it?
I think it's just a better told story and
Right.
kind of fleshes things out with the characters. So, and kind of just
Mhm.
kind of just comprehends, like, really smoothes out those rougher parts and the pacing for sure.
Interesting.
So yeah, I remember listening to it just for the heck of it and like, oh yeah, this was a lot of fun. Kind of just really getting into like Ray's head of like, like when she trying to get Chewie off of the transport, or why Kylo Ren is kind of doing the things he's doing.
Mhm.
Um, and also I think that one also has a lot of good Leia moments in it as well, of kind of like what Leia wants the future and whose legacy to be what. Like, there's a great scene where like Leia's about to die, about to do her thing, and Leia's like, I want Rey to be Luke's legacy. I
Mhm.
want Ray to do the Jedi Order. I want Poe to be my legacy. I
Mhm.
want him to kind of continue the political path of kind of move forward, which is always I always felt was kind of what Last Jedi was setting up in anyway. And
Yeah.
Rise of Skywalker, the movie, actually does a decent job of continuing that, where it's like, no, Poe, you're not a hotshot pilot. Like, you could be president, you could be Chancellor Poe Dameron one
Yeah.
day. So, I'm going to make sure you do that. And then Ben Solo is going to inherit the Solo mantle, in that, very very much
Hmm.
Ben is his father, his son in many ways.
Yeah.
He thinks he's Darth Vader, but no, Ben Solo, he's got the heart of Han in him, kind of a situation, and that's what
Yeah.
Leia wanted. I don't think she mentioned Finn or Rose. Sorry, but maybe she doesn't. I just don't remember the whole scene. But
Yeah.
yeah. So again, I would just I think, Matt, just if you ever have a chance, read that
Yeah. I
novelization.
keep meaning to. I got it for like $3 on Kindle.
Read
I
it or
got it.
listen to it on an audiobook. I mean, that's what I
You
do.
get an audiobook. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not going to give you everything you want, like, like the
Yeah.
deep who is Snoke in the Rise of the First Order, but I mean, definitely give you like the basic of like,
Yeah.
Palpatine, after he floated, he came to Exegol, and then he's been
Cool.
experimenting and blah blah blah. So
Mhm.
it definitely smoothens out. It just tells the story of Rise of Skywalker better in novel
Yeah.
form.
I mean, that's where the whole thing with Dathan and
Hmm.
being a clone and all that. That's where they actually finally. So they probably should have told that in the film, uh, or something. Make that emotional connection to Ray's parents. But yeah, okay. I definitely want to check that out. Um, just to comment here if I can find it.
Oh, I got it.
I mean that's why we're doing this, Laura. Thank you for poke your head up.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
that's why we're doing this, just to shine a spotlight. Well, we're not going to talk about the screen stuff, so let's shine a spotlight on these novels and everything. All these wonderful stories, novels, and comics, I should say, that are being written, still going on. You can go buy them and go enjoy them, and we can still talk about them because their industries are slightly better than the film industry and production industry. But
And I think we balanced out, and I put our list together because we both know
Yeah.
each other's list. So I wanted to because I knew if I can't do top 10 because it's like we are here all day. So it's like I have to make sacrifices, but I know Matthew will cover for me. Then I can talk about them. So okay, your first two.
My first two. This shouldn't be surprising if I mean, if you've been listening for the last hour and 20 minutes, this won't surprise you. So first up, Claudia Gray. If there's one author you should check out, I would say in all of Paper Canon, it is Claudia Gray. Although it's painful to say for my number two, but my second person. But I'll say her ability. I mean, I think I mentioned this the last two times we've done these look backs last month. Her ability to run the gamut. She's she's written a Leia story, an adult novel in the sequel trilogy era. She's written a Leia young adult story in kind of the Rise of the Empire. Her most important book, probably the most important books, one of the most beloved books of all of Star Wars, one of the most beloved stories now in all of Star Wars. Of those who've read it, is Lost Stars. And, that was the perfect introduction to Paper Canon for younger readers, for young adult readers, taking this pair of star-crossed lovers who are just ordinary, I mean, they're Imperial pilots, and throw them in through the events of the original trilogy, the events that we know, all the way to the Battle of Jakku. Just her ability to again turn a phrase and to express what characters think and feel and care about, to narrate a scene, to narrate action, is beyond above par. The cream of the crop. She wrote my favorite novel, Master and Apprentice. But again, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and exploring the relationship, exploring what Qui-Gon believes about the Force and all the serious mystical elements of it, and the critical elements with the Jedi. And the beautiful thing again about that novel is the ability to write an adult novel with Qui-Gon and a young adult novel with Obi-Wan and Princess Fanry, and just bring it all together in such a seamless package. And also with Averos and everything he goes up to. And then of course she's part of Project Luminous, and this is going to be a theme through my list here. She was on the ground at Skywalker Ranch, part of the team that developed the High Republic, which is my favorite thing, one of my favorite things in Star Wars. My favorite thing still going in Star Wars. And that's about to change probably in about 24 hours, but won't get too ahead of myself there. And develop my guy Reith Silas, who we'll talk about a character who is tempted to stay and stick his head in the library, in this library here, just contemplating everything, and is spurred out to say, what have you learned about history and about the Force, and apply it to what the challenges you're facing. And so this is Into the Dark, and the Fallen Star, and the destruction of Starlight Beacon, and everything that really does signify, and how much of a devastating cataclysm that is. So phase 3 is coming. She has a big hand in it. Definitely check out Claudia Gray. While I take a swig of water, what are your thoughts on Claudia Gray?
Oh yeah, I mean, I love Claudia. I just think my love about Claudia is just the way she writes for Leia. I think that both, honestly, I think I love her Leia novels more than I like her other stuff. Although I haven't read Lost Stars yet. I gotta drink water. Master Apprentice, I don't really remember much of it, so it's kind of escaped me. I didn't have a chance to read the High Republic stuff because I started phase 1 with all over the place with that one. Bloodline and Leia, Princess of Alderaan are, I think, my two favorite. They're honestly some of my favorite novels. Period. In some cases, I always, part of me wants to say I think I'll always love Bloodline the most because of nostalgia and the era. But I think I really did love Leia, Princess of Alderaan. I did a review of that with some buddies years back. We had a big discussion. It's great. But
Mhm.
I just love because like Leia's like my favorite character of the original trilogy. I mean, outside the Emperor and Vader, and I think she's underrated in those movies. And
Mhm.
anything to like really give her the spotlight. And I think Claudia Gray just had a really good voice for Leia, in particular. Like she is the definitive Leia author, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And if if Claudia Gray could have done Rise of Skywalker novel, that would have been interesting because that was kind of Leia's movie. I mean, I love Ray Carson, what she did with it. So,
Yeah.
um, great for that. But that is why personally love Claudia Gray because of her Leia work
Yeah.
in particular.
And Claudia Gray, I mean, she was on your list, and it was like, okay, well, let's try and eliminate the overlap. So, yeah, appreciate you able to chime in with Claudia Gray. The next person on my list, also number one. If you know me, Charles Soule. If there's any comic artist, comic author, check out. Also, not just the Star Wars comics, like check out his indie comic on Discovery Country, which also next arc comes out this Wednesday. 8 billion genies, She-Hulk, um, Death of Wolverine, Lando, Darth Vader 2017, the Star Wars ongoing, everything with the crossover in the last year in between Empire and Return of the Jedi and the beeline to Return of the Jedi. Dark Droids. Dark Droids is really bringing up some fascinating ideas about what it means for droids to tap into the dark side and the light side. And
Yeah, I
when
just
you're
read it.
reading a comic book, here's the thing: when you're reading a Charles Soule comic book, you forget you're reading a comic book. It feels like you're just being sucked into the story. His ability, I mean, part of that is he probably has a really great dialogue with the artists, talking about planning out flow and design and how you get engrossed in these characters and their dialogue and their actions, circumstances. Above all, everything that he puts Darth Vader through in that first decade or so, but really first few years of his existence as Darth Vader, trying to forget who Anakin is. It's so engaging and engrossing. Light of the Jedi, it's a great introduction, a great history based novel, ready to kick off the High Republic, especially those first 8 chapters with the Great Disaster. Is just this, you want to talk about engaging, non-stop pace, kind of Game of Thrones esque of you fall in love with the character and then he offs them because it's because there's no stakes, right? You don't know, right? Uh, so he's free to do that, to give the gravity of just how devastating the fall of the Hetzel disaster is. Yeah, and then I mean, Eye of the Storm, I think is a really fascinating look at, first of all, just where does Markian come from? Where does this guy come from? And what it's the 2-part comic, and what the Jedi response to the Nameless are. And I don't mind that. I know you had quibbles, but I don't mind that phase 1 ends on this comic, this epilogue that has reverberations, I think, all the way into John Jackson Miller's novel, like I was saying. So Charles Soule, his ability to look at character, to connect character to the grand events of the galaxy. I mean, all these authors do such a great job with that. uh and like pacing and flow and being engaging and engrossing. Yeah, again, cream of the crop. If there's one comic author to check out, it's Charles Soule. So
So yeah, I mean, I feel like I got maybe a lower opinion of Charles Soule. Like I find his pacing off kilter, and I get a little
it's just in
bored.
Light of the Jedi or in his
No,
comics
just
as
in
well?
general, like like the whole Fermata Cage build up. It's like, and that was it. Like,
But it's
do we
not
really?
in Dark
I don't know. I
Droids.
got bored with it.
Read Dark Droids.
I'm glad we got Dark Droid, but it's like, no, I still feel like you could have made more engaging. So like, even some of his Vader run, it's like there's sometimes we're like, it's not as tight as like the Kieran Gillen run. But that being said, Charles Soule does have this vibe of like he's sort of one of the few Star Wars authors who's allowed to do bigger things with his work and not kind of confined to like a very narrow set of stuff. I love the moment. I love that he's been able to kind of do this moment arc thing with like the Lando series, and then obviously Vader down and not Vader down, then Castle
The
Vader later
yeah.
on and stuff like that. So that's always fun when you get to self-reference some stuff. I hope you know I hope he will get to do the Momin backstory
Yeah.
at his own time thing, just to kind of
Yeah.
build off his own little world. Surprised he didn't do Rise of the Red Blade and gave it to Delilah S. Dawson to kind of build off that character
Well,
he invented for like 2 seconds.
There's before
Yeah.
you go on. There's two things I want to see Charles Soule do. Is I want to see him write that Palpatine story, and I want that to be a comic book because I think that would be maybe. A novel will be able to get into his head a little more. But um, I think the pitch is for a comic book, and I mean make it a bit of a longer run. Make it 6 arcs, 6 issues, maybe make it 8 issues to really tease out the story, but really give us that story. I want him involved on when the strike is over on the TV side. I want him involved. I mean, I hope he's involved in the Acolyte. I hope he's involved in just everything going forward. Has some say in everything going forward, because 8 billion genies I think is being looked at, and Undiscovered Country is being looked at. 8 billion genies is definitely going forward as a show when the strike is over. I know Undiscovered Country has been. So yeah, I keep saying this. Like he does have his hand in the TV world as well, in the production world as well, the screen canon world as well. So come on, Lucas.
I mean, I don't know if I want that. 'Cause I don't think Charles Soule is as good as you say he is. I've never been that impressed in some ways. But he does seem to be someone who's like allowed to kind of do bigger things compared to the other authors. So yeah, I mean, I don't hate Charles Soule, but he's certainly not Mike. Like I don't think he is.
The way my brain, maybe it's the way my brain goes, the way a lot of our brains go. I don't know. Maybe that's how it is. One last thing here. I mean, we've reamed off a lot of books, a lot of comics here. Wikipedia. Look up Wikipedia. Look up Claudia Gray and James Luceno and Alexander Freed. WOOKIEEPEDIA. And they'll give you a list of all the books they've written. And so
Thank you, Wikipedia.
Yeah, they're the one-stop shop for any kind of resource. Even if I need to look back and say, okay, what list of things, what happened here that I read, this book I read maybe 5 years ago.
Another thing though about back to kind of Charles Soule getting to do big things is he is gonna he got to tell a story of how Luke gets lightsabers. So I'm glad he gets to do kind of those bigger, impactful things. Not that the story needs to be impactful to be good, but it's kind of like, oh, this is how Luke Skywalker did get his lightsaber. That is, and I do actually think it's kind of cool because it's like,
and he's going to do a good job saying what that means for Luke as a character, what that means for Luke as a person, right?
Yeah,
that's the thing. Is it's not simply some cool fandom lore thing. It's okay. What does this matter in the moment?
And I'm glad you got to overall do something with Kira that was pretty cool. Yeah. I did think it went on a little too long. It could have been tightened. For me, it's just all about I think Claudia Gray's like a bit more of a better technical writer. I think she's a lot tighter in her plots, and her just kind of her prose, or like Kieran Gill's a lot tighter in his prose, with comics. But Charles also has like great thematics and ideas for sure, for which I always appreciate. I'll go to my number 3 and 4. I'll do mine. Unless you got one more thing, anything you
go for it.
Okay. So my number 3 is Delilah S. Dawson. I love Delilah S. Dawson. Her novels are really good. They always focus on like bad guys, and she's really good at writing bad guys. Both in a sense of suspending your moral disbelief, but also in terms of
sorry, keep going.
Sure. And especially in terms of suspending moral disbelief, or Rise of the Red Blade, kind of starting more from a place of nuance and then kind of losing your moral disbelief as you go on. And I'm kind of glad you kind of got to kind of make a semi-sequel to that Phasma book with the Galaxy's Edge novel, which is actually really good and a really good look in the sequel trilogy era. So definitely something to read. So that's my number 3. I'll get my.
I just mentioned Delilah Dawson. Yeah, I've read Phasma. having been to Galaxy's Edge, I really should read that novel because it goes into everything, the resistance space there. Yeah, Phasma. I mean, the ability to take this really minor character, and it doesn't connect much. Doesn't She doesn't have much to do in the films, but really interesting story. Really interesting, just small, isolated story of this character who really gets pushed through the ringer. And yeah,
Yeah, good stuff. And my number 4, Beth Revis,
Mhm.
of both Prince and the Scoundrel and what's that other one? It's the Rogue One one. Shoot, I don't
so
remember. What's it called?
uh,
It's the Rogue
Rebel
One.
Rising,
Rebel Rising.
and
Thank
I
you.
know because it's right up there.
Um,
Mhm,
I like both her books quite a bit. They both have very good, strong starts. I always feel like it's the third act that always gets a little bit less interesting for sure. But like the first act of Princess Scoundrel was really good. Just that immediate battle after Endor, just Leia kind of figuring herself out.
mhm,
And with Rebel Rising, I love everything about how she writes Saw and Jin's relationship with Saw and
mhm,
kind of Jin's upbringing. It's really good and really fascinating look. There's a lot of interesting things that are kind of mentioned. So yeah, I really like Beth Revis. I hope she gets to come back and do something because she's really cool. And I hope she
mhm.
gets to write some more stuff.
Yeah, I mean, she hasn't written too much, but and I've read Princess and the Scoundrel. I mean, she was. This is the first entry in the big triptych from last summer around Celebration, just after Celebration. Yeah, Princess and the Scoundrel. I mean, to take these. I mean, talk about a major moment. Han and Leia's honeymoon.
Hmm.
What's that like? What does that happen? And it's not simply an ad for Galactic Star Cruiser. May that rest in peace. Um, it's really spins a great story out of yeah, not really Galactic Star, but who are Han and Leia, and how can they be a great team? We know ultimately what happens, and how it that presages how they end up not working out as a couple. But yeah, to really explore, okay, what Leia, she's on her honeymoon, she's trying to take a vacation, but there's this crisis over here, and she's trying to bring this new planet into the New Republic and say, oh yeah, it's uh, we're actually going to be out for the little guy and try and get a mutually acceptable deal, mutually sustainable deal. And yeah, it was taking that moment and really, yeah, I mean, that's the thing that all these authors are able to do, is craft good character story. And that's what that's what Tim Zahn was able to do ultimately, I think, at the start. I mean, again, he's more the hard military sci-fi, but especially now, uh, when we have a better sense, I think, not a better sense, but um a lot of us, I think, are starting have really come to say lore and backstory and the nerdy stuff really has to serve character and serve story. It can't just be there for its own sake. And as
Exactly.
much as we want things to be there for its own sake, and some things I don't think need to be there at all. Um, yeah, like I mean, everything you talk about E.K. Johnston and the lightsabers and bleeding the lightsabers. I mean, that really serves Ahsoka's character, but then has reverberations uh, into Charles Soule's novel, comic book, Darth Vader comic book. So yeah,
Yeah, that comic book. Oh, wink.
yeah. So Beth Revis, yeah.
Yeah, that's my number 3 and 4. What are your number 3 and
So
4?
mine are, we've mentioned him already, Kieran Gillen. Again, mainly for his Darth Vader run, he did take over the ongoing Star Wars run from Jason Aaron. When I'll start with that actually, because when he did that, leading up to I think around issue number 50, there was like the end of the Jason Aaron run, and this isn't necessarily Jason Aaron's fault, but it was really starting to sag. It was really starting to, what's it doing? Where's it going? What's happening here? And Kieran Gillen comes in, and I don't know if, yeah, I think he brings up uh the hope dies.
That's my
And
favorite arc.
yes, and everything with Leia and the Rebel Alliance being in real trouble, and saying, okay, how do they go from the victory of the Death Star, but how they get to, well, the Empire is actually really in the ascendancy, and they really
Mhm.
are everywhere, the rebellion really is actually in trouble. Um, and what does that mean for these characters? What does that mean for Leia and her sense of leadership and leadership capacity? And so you're really able to take that and kick it off where his real entry into Star Wars in this is the Darth Vader run, the 2015 Darth Vader run. And it's a really significant story that one of the big most significant things is it introduces Dr. Aphra. And the way this original character, you want to talk about an impact. This original character who has taken on a life of her own, who has a run of her own, which I'll get to in a bit. Spoiler alert. Really complicated, intriguing character that is able to survive being kind of snarky to Darth Vader. What does that look like? What does that mean? And then, looking at Vader, what is Vader like just after he's encountered Luke Skywalker for the first time? And what does that mean for how he understands himself, understands his past? One of my favorite moments, you want to talk about pivotal moments in all of Star Wars, is that crossover with the Jason Aaron and Kieran Gillen comic number 6. The very early, this is one of the first things that happens in the new canon, is Vader learns he has a son, and Kieran Gillen was able to write that with Jason Aaron, and we get into that first prequel flashback. I think I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, that first prequel flashback, and again, this shows what these comics can do, what a Vader comic can do, and it's kind of been done a lot since. Both Charles Soule and Greg Pak have done this, delved into this a lot, but he really kicked off. Kieran Gillen really kicked off this. How does Vader remember Anakin? How does he forget Anakin? How does he relate to Palpatine and trying to jockey for his position and say, okay, now we understand each other. Being a true Sith in being out for himself and how that's ultimately impossible. The Vader kills Anakin moment really first comes. You see that in the Disney Plus streaming show. That comes first off. And here's the wondering in the Jodie Hazard adaptation, actually. That first comes in the Kieran Gillen run. And that's one of my favorite issues, number 25. I had to read it twice because I was so dumbfounded. Just amazing, that vision that Vader has of confronting Anakin on Mustafar. Blows your mind. Go check it out. He both things he's done in Star Wars in adult Marvel comics have been gold, and they're substantial. They're longer runs, and so about 25 issues each, and so definitely check those out.
I like all the Vader comics we've had. Well, for the most part, like I think like all 3 main runs have always been sort of my favorite stuff. I think Gillen's certainly my favorite when it comes to the mainline Star Wars run. I think when he took over, that's when you got the Mon Cala stuff. That's when Rogue One started really coming in. Hope dies. That connection to Rogue One is like a almost a semi-sequel.
The birth of Rogue Squadron. We get the moment.
The birth of Rogue Squadron, the death of General Draven. Draven gets to be a character. That was cool. Like I think Gillen's mainline Star Wars might be. I like it more than say the Vader. And in terms of which Vader I like the most, I don't know. Soul. I do like Soul's Vader quite a lot. I love the Fortress Vader stuff. I have to reread the whole Vader Gillen era just to remind myself. But Kieran Gillen, great. I wish he'd come back to the comics. Get him back into the main line after Soul's done.
Sure. Or get him to do something. And also for the Shutorun people, folks, the princess. What's her name? And Queen how she's this. Sorry, go ahead.
Is her name Queen Latrice or something? Or
the Queen of Shutorun, and just introducing that, the machinations, how I think she assassinates her father and takes the throne, and how she's this foil for Leia. She's this royalty, but kind of what Leia could become if she went to the dark side, and was under Vader's thumb, and had to make all those compromises, and then ultimately, I think I can't remember, does she end up saving the day or helping save the day? But all the compromises that she has to make how Leia perceives, okay, how do I act differently? How do I serve the galaxy in a more wholesome way? And so yeah, bringing her in the Vader comic, and then bringing that through and talk about a character who can come through in the same author, bringing that through. So really well done. Of course, she's the one who's responsible for Hope dying, right, at
Yeah.
the in there. So that my fourth one, Kevin Scott,
Hmm.
and again, here he's my third Luminous author here. And yeah, the first thing I think I read of his was listen to Dooku Jedi Lost, and how he again mining a character, even using Ventress as a framing device, that was still effective because we were able to. It was a bit more than just a framing device. We were able to dive into uh, dive into her story and where she came from. Having the Dark Disciple, where she ends up in the back of our minds. Sorry. Um, but then I mean, tracking Dooku all the way from and being a Padawan, being again having this complicated relationship with his family, uh, going forward, and then having a complicated relationship with his birth family, with his Jedi family, and and ultimately him leaving the Order, being the 20th Fallen Master, the first mention of Keith Trennis, the 19th Fallen Master, and then of course everything he's developed with Keith Trennis. Sorry. Oi, I need to work on my breathing. Everything he's developed with Keith Trennis in the High Republic comics, um, really, really rich, really pointing towards, like I've said before multiple times, pointing towards saying something profound about the Jedi being stuck in their ways. I mean, needing to recover their sense of being the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, and so really fleshed out, developed this character that we read that story about how he um he was really stuck. He really had interest at the retreat, the Luminous retreat at Skywalker Ranch. He had this imposter syndrome in the room with Claudia and Charles and the rest. And he went away and he went away, went for a walk, and the way a walk can clear your head, right? And he developed this question: what did the Jedi fear? And that question that keeps spinning. You want to talk about something that the way that things that lead into story choices and the inform story choices and character choices. What do the Jedi fear? And it being more nuanced, and being more complicated than simply losing power, the way Palpatine says, right? Um, and Keith Trennis being this embodiment of no, don't fear that. Stop fearing that. Oh no, you're fearing that. I have to leave. And so I'm really excited. Finally, we're going to see her story come to completion. The one that he developed, the one that he established, he seeded into Dooku Jedi Lost, and he thought up right then and there at Skywalker Ranch, able to bring that to fruition. So Kevin Scott, Ghosts of Vader's Castle, Tales of Vader's Castle, he's able to touch into the young reader horror genre, and write some pretty interesting, creepy stuff. Another great range of storytelling as well. So that's Kevin Scott.
Yeah, I don't have much of an opinion on Cabin Scott. I don't think I've read enough to really garner an opinion.
Mhm.
The only thing I've really read of his was his really adult novel Phase One. Name escapes me. Into the Dark? No, Rising
So,
Storm. Right,
The Rising Storm, yeah,
Rising
which
Storm.
is one of the most loved novels in all of Star Wars for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can tell
The
why. Like I
talk about
was
a great
re
the greater disaster of the Nile taking out the Farabello, and this one continuous story that's unrelenting and doesn't give up, just like the Nile just don't give up. Uh, and able to grip you and not put it down. Yeah, really. I mean, and that's hard to do. That's hard to write, and hard to sustain a pace in a novel of that length. And it's even more is more experimental, more auteur in a way as well. So like
no.
Ms. Nolan-esque, if you will.
I mean, but yeah, I mean, I do think that definitely got well paced and it didn't feel like it was dragging. So I was like, yo, yeah. So that's kind of all I got on Kevin Scott. I've never read enough of his work to really get a good feel for him outside of that one book. I think.
I gotta breathe through my diaphragm, guys. Diaphragm.
Oh
Okay,
no.
your last author. Go ahead.
Yeah, my last one, Adam
Mhm,
Christopher, uh, writer of Shadow of the Sith, and
mhm.
just taking another kind of a not tie-in novel. I mean, certainly tie-in novel to a certain extent. But just kind of taking a moment and making a whole story out of it. I mean, I think that was really
Yeah.
good. It's definitely a continuation of the Rise of Skywalker novelization. That sorry out there, don't what's the noise? The Rise of Skywalker novelization, Shadow of the Sith. Very much a duopoly of two books that you can probably read back to back, and I think you'll get a good appreciation
Hmm.
of it. He's new, obviously, so we got to do a General Pride novel
Yeah.
not novel, but a story for from a certain point of view. So I
Okay.
hope they keep him around, and I hope he kind of gets to make his own little universe, just like the Charles Soule and Claudia Gray and Kevin Scotts of Star Wars. And I hope they keep bringing him back for other stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah. Make. I mean, yeah. I like Shadow of the Sith, and I did think it made Rise of Skywalker. That's one helped me appreciate that film better as well. So yeah, it's good. Um, and then I guess quickly, we're running out of time, so we're a long time. So I'll just go quickly. My last is Alyssa Wong. You want to talk about the definitive Afra? So Kieran Gillen introduces this character, and um, and there's I mean, Kieran Gillen then gives her her own in standalone comic that kind of goes in this direction. It doesn't quite, she's trying to, I guess, help the rebellion and um in her own self-interested way, and an auctioneer, and this weird thing about Triple Zero and BD. Alyssa Wong comes along, and Alyssa Wong is non-binary themselves, and Afro disaster lesbian, but kind of shedding the disaster part of it and saying, okay, uh, what will it take for Afra to become more heroic? And part of it is uh, getting getting the people around her, Sana and Magna and her father, to actually love her and show her what happens when that happens, and encountering this weird, mystical, ancient dark side sect that used magnets, and was able to go into people's heads, called the Ascendant, and the just the Formatic Age with the Spark Eternal, and being taken over with that Afro run. And it's I mean, just the Afro run alone, and I think it's up to number 37, 38 now. Really goes into all, takes Afro on this journey, and really, in a really well paced, really consistent, really well worked out manner that weaves in and out of the Crimson Saga. um is more connected to the Crimson Saga, definitely connected to Dark Droids now, and I can't wait for more Afra into Dark Droids, because it's weird. And that's the thing about what Alyssa Wong is able to do, is write weird Afra that's still grounded in Star Wars, but still pushes the envelope, but it's still grounded, and still grounded above all in character. And so you really feel for this rogue archaeologist who really pushed people away and is now opening people up, and opening up to the rest of the galaxy. I hope so. Hopefully, yeah, always going to have a little bit of a chip, a little bit of acid sprinkled in there, but Alyssa Wong being the person to take her on this journey, and they've done a fantastic job. So yeah, that's Alyssa Wong. Also, um, the Barnes and Noble exclusive, which I do have a copy um, of Tales of Light and Life. Alyssa Wong got a short story in there. Alyssa Wong is also officially a Luminous author, writing a young adult story with Daniel Jose Older. Got to see them do a lot more. I'd love to see them do a full on, even an adult novel. Um, Maybe start with the young adult novel. I think that would be more their speed in terms of the just showing emotionally vibrant characters, but then yeah, having the dense web of an adult novel, even an Afro novel, would be fantastic. So yeah, that's Alyssa Wong. That's my list, folks to check out. How much of Alyssa Wong have you been able to check out?
not much of anything,
Okay.
but no, I think it's really cool that Afro is sort of a character that, even though a different author invented them, someone kind of really got to
Yeah.
define who they are,
Yeah.
which is always interesting to see for sure. Certainty, it's sort of like the opposite of like Thrawn, where it's like Tim Zahn is the author that everyone sort of mimics. He would like, even when Filoni's writing, it was like still looking back to what Zahn did, because Zahn defined the character so hard that it's like no one really kind of reinventing the wheel at this point. Sorry about that.
That's right.
But yeah, it sounds like the Alyssa Wong Afro run is really good. Yay.
Yeah, and just to say about Afra herself, I mean, talk about a character that I say you want to talk about. This is the one character that people who haven't read any of the comics probably know about, at least a little bit. It's a character who has transcended the medium that she originated from, and it's a matter of time. I mean, she had a fact bob, she had an audio play, which wasn't bad, but um, I was good, but also had some issues with. Yeah, I want to see her on screen. I want to see her. My cold take, my dark horse is for her to show up in Andor. That would be amazing, but or maybe in Rangers of the New Republic or something. But Mando season 4. But yeah,
She'll fit
give
better there.
her, yeah, give her some time. I mean, she's it's due for her to come through. So I mean, that's both Kieran Gillen and Alyssa Wong building that character up. So, but yeah, do you have any further thoughts?
The darn
Let's see.
ambulances everywhere.
I know.
No, it's sort of funny how I started this conversation at the very beginning, where I said
Mhm.
like every author had a canon, and I feel like we covered it a little bit. But Alexander Freed is the military guy.
Yeah.
Claudia Gray is very much into both romance and kind of deep thought. Charles Soule's a bit like George, and like come up with like the deeper lore stuff.
Yeah.
Alyssa Wong got Afra. Kieran Gillen, bit more wide range. But no, it's like it's cool seeing all these different authors. I like the authors, the one who like I can tell right away like what their book is, like their
Yeah.
style. They have a very unique style. Like their view
Mhm.
on the universe is very clear, and they have a very particular voice and message they want to convey. But yeah, we love all these authors, and we hope to see more of them, and we hope to see new authors come as well and be added to our list next time we do this
Yeah.
in a couple years.
Why not? Already about Alexander Freed, Ray Carson, Delilah Dawson, Beth Revis, Adam Christopher, Claudia Gray, Charles Soule, Kieran Gillen, Kevin Scott, Alyssa Wong. Honorable mentions to James Lucino, Tim Zahn, and E.K. Johnston. That is our list of authors we think you should check out if you're curious about Paper Canon, or if you know it fairly well. That will do it for our show tonight. Let us know who do you think, who is your favorite author who in Star Wars, your favorite comic author, novelist, young adult novelist, whoever. Let us know in the comments below. Who do you think you should check out, or you want to check out, and you're curious about? Yes, Wikipedia. That's exactly what I mean. Check that place out. They do the forces work. Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining us. Going 2 hours. It's all good. 2 major big topics to get into, so we did it. Good job, Joel. Yeah, so everyone, let us know let us know what you thought of tonight. What do you think? What are you looking forward to in John Jackson Miller's what's it called, the Living Force? That's what that thing's called. Let us know what you think of that. What do you think of Paper Canon, where it's done, where it's gone? What do you think Charles Soule's next project should be? There we go. I don't know, or whoever else you really hope to see. So you'll listen in the comments below on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, etc., on Twitch, etc. You can follow us at Ion Cannon Pod, EYEONCANON POD on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram. Joel, what can they find you on the internet?
You can find me at JID2021 on Twitter. You can find me at the Iron Cannon Pod. But mostly, I'm on the Star Wars Underworld Discord. So if you want to message me or talk to me, go through Discord there.
There you go. You can follow me on Instagram and Threads at MNEUG1138, on Twitter at NEUG485. I'm a little bit at Ion Cannon Pod. I'm also in the Discord. Check that out as well. Next week, we are going back to great moments. Sorry. Hold you in suspense. We're doing the thing. We're going to great moments in Paper Canon, continuing our spotlight on all these wonderful stories in a galaxy far, far away. Talking about the first arc of Charles Soule's 2017 comic that we did mention. Again, that is my favorite comic book as a whole. We're delving in just the first arc, looking back on what transpired in that wonderful story. But Joel, 2 hours, we did it. Till then,
Woo!
let's blow this thing and head home.